Welcome back in. Welcome back in. Before we get started, just want to say really quickly, I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy some football on Thursday with the three games that we're going to get. Some nice food and some time with some family. Hope everybody has a good day. But regardless, we are here to talk about the RB rankings for this week. So let's just get into it. Our RB ones for this week are Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, and Jeff Wilson Jr. So let's talk about a few of these RB1s before we get over to our RB2s. And we have, first off, we have Tony Pollard coming off just a monster performance against the Vikings, scoring nearly 40 fantasy points in that game. Things you absolutely love to see. Tony Pollard has been one of the most efficient running backs in the league this year. He has over almost 1,000 total yards already on the year, 8 touchdowns, 16.3 fantasy points per game. And he's also the RB8 overall on the season. He has now scored 20 or more fantasy points over his last 3 games. He also has 30 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games as well. So he has been an absolute monster this year and really looks like the best running back on the Cowboys. We've been talking about this all year. Jerry Jones doesn't seem to see it that way. But regardless of that, he has still been an excellent fantasy producer. And I don't see that changing. Depending on matchup, he's got to be a pretty solid RB1 for me moving forward rest of season. I think he is that good. I think he's going to continue to see probably anywhere from 15 to 18 touches. I think Zeke is going to start being more of the short yardage, change of pace, goal line back. That is going to be frustrating because he is going to steal some touchdowns on the goal line like he did this past week where he scored 2 touchdowns. But it's just evident that Tony Pollard is definitely their best running back and their best option. So this week they get the Giants, who allow the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. They also allow the 10th most rushing touchdowns, the 7th most rushing yards. Giants also allow a rushing touchdown on 40% of drives, which is the 6th highest rate in the league. Let's keep it moving here. Let's talk about Jeff Wilson. They play Houston. Since being acquired by the Dolphins, he's averaging about 13 carries per game, 4 targets per game, 107.5 total yards. He's also averaging a touchdown per game, which is good for 19.2 fantasy points. This week, they do get a Houston Texans defense that is dreadful. They allow the most fantasy points to running backs. They allow 153 rushing yards per game. They've also allowed the most rushing touchdowns in the league as well. So great matchup for Jeff Wilson. Yes, Raheem Mostert's going to mix in, but Jeff Wilson looks like the leader of this backfield now, as he should be, because he has definitely looked the part. So Jeff Wilson, Tony Pollard, both strong RB1s this week. Let's keep it moving and talk about our RB2s. And we have Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, Damian Pierce, James Conner, Jamal Williams, Miles Sanders, Antonio Gibson, Najee Harris, David Montgomery, Isaiah Pacheco, and Devin Singletary. So let's get into it and talk about some of these RB2s. We have Travis Etienne, who really over the past month has been somebody that we've regularly ranked inside the top 12. But this week is a much tougher matchup. He is seeing about 58% of the opportunities in this backfield, about 16 touches per game. He has almost 1,000 total yards and 4 touchdowns on the year. He's also 20th in yards per route run, 19th in yards created per touch. But Baltimore has been very good against the run. 5th fewest rushing yards, 7th fewest touchdowns, and the 12th fewest fantasy points for the Baltimore Ravens. So I would temper expectations a little bit with Travis Etienne. You're probably still starting, depending on your whatever options you have. Be sure to leave it in the comment section below. If you have any questions for us, start sits type stuff, especially with 3 Thursday games. I know we usually have a lot of decisions to make here early in the week, and I hate Thursday football, but this is a decision we're going to have to make this week with some of these guys. But Travis Etienne, temper expectations a little bit this week because Baltimore is very good, and they do not seem to be wanting to utilize him as much in the passing game, which is frustrating because he's a great pass catcher out of the backfield. But I digress. Let's keep it moving here and talk about Miles Sanders versus Green Bay. Miles Sanders on the season's averaging about 16 touches per game. He's a non-factor in the passing game, only 43 receiving yards on the year, which is frustrating, especially in PPR formats. He does have 757 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, which is saving his bacon right now. 12.8 fantasy points per game. He is 14th in missed tackles forced and 28th in routes run. Green Bay has been very bad against the run as well. 30th in rush DVOA, 3rd most rushing yards, 18th most touchdowns, and the 7th most fantasy points for running backs. I get it with Miles Sanders because it's frustrating with Jalen Hurts on a week-to-week basis because Jalen Hurts is going to steal opportunities. He's going to steal goal line work from Miles Sanders. But Miles Sanders is still the best running back they have in this backfield, despite being in a committee with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott. So let's talk about James Conner, somebody that I absolutely love this week. Handling about 60% of the opportunities, 11.7 carries, 3.9 targets, 314 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, 12.2 fantasy points per game. He's not been very efficient, though. 28th in yards created per touch, and 29th in yards per route run. But with him releasing Eno Benjamin, he has pretty much become the guy here in this backfield. Scored another touchdown against the 49ers. This is an elite matchup against the Chargers. 29th in rush DVOA, second most rushing yards, fifth most touchdowns, and third most fantasy points per game. Again, elite matchup against the Chargers. We want to play our running backs that are playing the Chargers because they've been dreadful. They're starting practice squad guys on their defensive line now. And so James Conner, I think, is a really, really good play this week against the Chargers. We'll have to see if guys like Kyler Murray or Rondell Moore are able to play. Either way, I still think James Conner is in a great spot this week. So fire him up with confidence this week against the Chargers. Let's keep it moving here. We're going to talk about Najee Harris. Welcome back to Fantasy Relevance, Najee Harris, coming off his best game of the year with 27.6 PPR points. He did that on 20 carries for 90 yards, 4 receptions on 6 targets, 26 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's now posted 90 plus yards in back-to-back week. He did the same thing, 99 yards against the Saints. Now, listen, Najee Harris has been super, super frustrating this year. People drafted him with their first round pick, maybe an early second round pick, depending on your league, but he has not produced that this year. He has not looked very good, and especially early in the year. He looks to be back from whatever injury he was, dealing with early in the season with his foot injury that he had, and he's starting to actually look a lot better. And hopefully, this is a sign of things to come. Now, this is not a great matchup this week against the Colts. They are fifth in rush DVOA, 12th fewest fantasy points on the season. So this is not a great matchup for Najee Harris. But with Jalen Warren exiting that game, and if he misses some time, this is just only better news for Najee Harris. So I think he's going to be utilized more as a pass catcher. If he can start seeing 5 to 6 targets per game like he did this past week, that is only going to help his fantasy production on a week to week basis. Because this isn't a very good offense. This is another offense that's not going to be able to sustain drives, to be able to get a lot of opportunities to score touchdowns. But Najee Harris, if he's going to be the guy and he's going to see 20 plus touches and he's going to get back to being much more of his 80 to 90% opportunity share, wheels up for Najee Harris in the second half, and he could end up being one of the best buy lows. Najee Harris, I think, is still a decent low end RB2 this week, based off matchup. So let's keep it moving here and let's talk about Isaiah Pacheco. They get the LA Rams. Now listen, this is not a good matchup either for a running back. They are fourth in rush DVOA, sixth fewest rushing yards, seventh fewest touchdowns, and the eighth fewest fantasy points to running backs. Since taking over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging 15 carries per game and just almost 100 total yards per game. He is 17th in yards after contact per attempt. Now, we know CEH is going to miss an extended period of time with a high ankle sprain. Of course, Jerick McKinnon's going to mix in. I think they could elevate either Ronald Jones or Wayne Gallman. Wouldn't be surprised if it's actually Wayne Gallman over Ronald Jones, mainly just because of his ability to pass protect and be able to do that. Ronald Jones is a non-factor there, and they already have somebody with inexperience there with Isaiah Pacheco. So I still think it's Isaiah Pacheco's back. I don't care even if they did elevate Ronald Jones. He's not like he's going to come in and be the starter. The guy's been a healthy scratch all year. Now, let's talk lastly about Dameon Pierce against Miami. Dameon Pierce last week was the first time he failed to score double-digit fantasy points. You have to go back to week 2 since that's happened. It was just a really, really bad game for the Houston Texans. It's really not Dameon Pierce's fault. But on the season, he has 772 rushing yards, 126 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. He's averaging 14.9 fantasy points per game. This is not a great matchup. Miami is really good against the run. 8th in rush DVOA, third fewest rushing yards, the 12th most rushing touchdowns. And I will say, over the last couple of weeks, they've started to, prior to their bye, they had allowed 148.1 rushing yards per game over their previous 2 games. So might be seeing a little bit of a crack here in that rush defense. And Dameon Pierce could make it happen. It's just really bad offense. Again, kind of like some of these other guys that are back in RB2s. If you have to play him, play him. If you have some better options, I would look to sit him this week. So let's go ahead and jump over to some of our flex options this week. Samaje Perine, will hit on him. Really bad matchup against the Titans. They are first in rush DVOA, third in fewest fantasy points per game. If Joe Mixon happens to miss and you picked up Samaje Perine, or you've been holding him, you could look to play him. Do not expect to do what he did last week against the Steelers. He had 11 carries for 30 yards, 4 receptions on 52 yards and 3 touchdowns. That ain't going to happen again. He had 30 fantasy points. Temper expectations. If you absolutely must start him, like you're a Joe Mixon owner and you picked him up, I think you could plug him in. But I am going to temper expectations that hopefully he can be involved in this passing game and it's a PPR format, which has helped. So Samaje Perine, very limited expectations. Now I want to talk about somebody that I actually have much, much higher. I have Rachaad White as RB16 overall this week. Cody has a much lower. That's just why he is not in our Week 12 rankings. Now, I think he has that right now because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen with Leonard Fournette. But I think Rashad White, either way, whether Leonard Fournette plays or not, is going to have a big role in this offense. He played 65% of the snaps 2 weeks ago before they went on bye. He had 105 total rushing yards, or 105 rushing yards in that game. On the season, he's averaging about 3 targets. Fournette is likely to return, but I don't think that he's going to get some sort of full workload. He's going to be come in. He's going to play 70% of the snaps. I would expect Rashad White to do much what he was going to do the last time he played against Seattle. I think he's going to be the lead back. And I think you can see Fournette be much more limited. Rashad White, I think, makes for a really, really great play this week. I have him as a high end RB2. They play Cleveland, second most fantasy points for running back, sixth most rushing yards, and tied for the most rushing touchdowns. I love Rashad White this week. If you picked him up, you stashed him. Maybe if you have some of these other guys that I've talked about that maybe have lesser matchups, like a Najee Harris or a Damian Pierce type or somebody like that, I would definitely play Rashad White over those guys this week. I think he's in for a big week this week against Cleveland, who really struggles to stop the run. And then lastly, really quickly, Latavius Murray. I just want to mention him. Melvin Gordon was released today. Chase Edmonds has a high ankle sprain. This is his backfield. This is like Will Smith from Fresh Prince, just sitting there staring around in an empty room, with nobody else there because there's no other running backs there to worry about. This is Latavius Murray's backfield now, boys and girls. Last week he rushed 17 times for 49 yards and a score. He also saw 4 targets for 23 yards, good for 17 fantasy points. They get a Carolina defense that is really bad against the run as well. 5th most fantasy points allowed to running back. So Latavius Murray, also a pretty decent low end RB2 option slash flex option this week against the Carolina Panthers. So that'll pretty much wrap it up. I appreciate everybody checking out the video. Again, everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Be sure to drop all your comments in the comment section below. We will answer every one of them for you guys, get you guys ready for this week. Fantasy playoffs are only a couple weeks away. So let's get it locked in here and let's get that dub. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.